Long fantasy books that are actually worth your time. Yes, we know fantasy books tend to be crazy long and it's a huge commitment, but there are actually a lot of really long books that are definitely worth checking out. So I've been wanting to make this video for a while, and just want to mention this isn't a ranking, so it's not a top 10 best long fantasy books. And also for a book to be on this list, it had to be either a standalone or the first in a series. So obviously there's a lot of really long books in, like for example The Dark Tower in the second half of the series, but the first book is very short, so there won't be any Dark Tower books on here. And for fun, for this video, I'm actually going to rank these books from shortest to longest out of the 10 books I actually recommend. So first up, on spot number 10, we have a book called The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu, which is 640 pages. So it's not that long in fantasy standards, but that's because a lot of the later books are crazy longs, and I also just love the series. Whenever I have an opportunity to bring the series up, I will, and it's just so good. This series is not going to be for everyone, and especially the first book can be a bit hard, but I loved The Grace of Kings, and I want to give you a overview of what this book is about and series, so you might have your interest piqued. So, The Grace of Kings, the story follows two central characters, Kunigaro, a charismatic bandit with carefree attitude, and Matasindu, a stern and noble warrior from a political family. They begin as unlikely allies in a rebellion against the oppressive rule of Emperor Mapideri, who has united the kingdom of Dara through conquest but governs with tyranny. As the rebellion succeeds and the empire collapses, Kuni and Mato's differing visions for the future put them on a collision course. Kuni favors a pragmatic and flexible approach to the leadership, while Mata believes in a strict, honor-bound system based on traditional ideas. Their friendship turns into rivalry as they struggle for control of Dara. So this might sound as a very character-driven story, but the scale is absolutely huge, and so many crazy characters pop up and leave. In some ways, I kind of feel like this is a Malazan light series, because yeah, the complexity is quite crazy, but I love it. Alright, next up we have a book with 672 pages, The Dragabone Chair by Tad Williams. I feel like I've talked about this series a lot recently, because I recently read it and I feel it's so criminally underrated on BookTube. So I'll keep it brief here. If you're a big fan of Robin Hobb or classic fantasy or even Game of Thrones, because this series was a huge inspiration for George R. Martin to write A Song of Ice and Fire, then you need to check out this series. It's so beautifully written, very character driven, and it has a similar writing style as Robin Hobb. Now, the thing I think will put the series off for a lot of people is its pacing. Tad Williams, he likes to take his time, and that is actually a critique of mine. I love The Dragabone Chair, but the last book is so ridiculously long. It's like 1600 pages, and it didn't need to be that long. So yeah, if you hate slow-paced books and more like flowery, beautiful writing, then you probably hate this one, but otherwise, you should definitely check it out. Tad Williams is a genius. Now, another big book that is definitely worth checking out is from today's sponsor, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding Civilization, made by Hungry Minds. Now, the book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization, is the book of incredible inventions and discoveries. It is a captivating, illustrated encyclopedia offering a fascinating journey through the most significant human inventions, appealing to both adults and children. And it's not just a book, it's a fun and engaging way to explore history, making it perfect for collectors, friends, parents, and colleagues, and anyone with a curious mind, eager to delve into the wonders of human innovation. I mean, it's genuinely a perfect gift. Also, the book has over 400 pages with the most amazing inventions of humankind, with 180 topics divided into 23 chapters, filled with unique handmade illustrations, printed on high-quality matte art paper, and wrapped around with a stunning laminated cover. Also, the project collected more than 3.2 million investments on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and became one of the top projects on the site, and has had more than 50 professionals involved. I mean, this book is absolutely beautiful, and you can buy it and get a discount using my code. I'll leave a link in the description down below. Thank you so much to Hungry Minds for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the video, shall we? Alright, thirdly, we have a book with 714 pages, and I love this series, and I never hear anyone talk about it on BookTube. Almost never. I like Patrick Leo and some others have read it, but that's going to be Illborn by Daniel T. Jackson. There are very few books that have given me proper book hangovers in recent times, but the first book did, and the second book as well. I just love the series. It's so incredibly character driven, and Daniel T. Jackson just has a way of writing chapters that almost feel like tiny episodes in a longer series. It is so addictive, and I hope more people will actually check it out. Just read the prologue. Literally, go to Kindle, download the free sample, and read the prologue. A lot of people literally feel that that is enough for them to actually be interested enough to read the whole book, but I expect a lot of you had no idea what the series is about, so I'll give you a brief overview. Illborn, the story follows 4 young people, Arion, Alana, Liana, and Corin, who despite living in different parts of the world, each begin experiencing strange visions and manifesting mysterious powers. In a world dominated by the oppressive religious rule of the Holy Church of the Lord Aguel, their newfound abilities make them both feared and haunted. As they struggle to understand their gifts, their paths gradually intertwine, leading them into conflicts involving war, faith, and power. So good. There are definitely some horrible and infuriating characters in the series as well, but I feel like most series have that as well. So check out the Illborn and also the second book, and the third book is coming out very soon. I can't wait. Alright, next up we have a book that is 736 pages, and that's going to be Empire of the Vampire by J. Christoph. So I read this book when it came out on release and I loved it, and for some reason I just haven't come around to reading the second book. If you enjoy horror fantasy, which I feel is such an underutilized subgenre in the fantasy sphere, then you need to check out this because it is absolutely bloody, grim, and has a lot of really dark and scary elements. And if I have some critiques, then I must say that some of the dialogue is just so over the top crazy that it kind of took me out of the immersion occasionally, but overall the plot and the setting is just so dark and gritty and interesting that it really drew me in, and I definitely found it a worth investment, and I can't wait to read book 2. Emperor of the Vampire follows the story of Gabriel de Leon, the last of the Silver Saints, a holy order sworn to hunt down vampires. The book is set in a world where the sun has not risen in 27 years. The vampire empire has nearly wiped out humanity. Gabriel, once a revered warrior, is now a broken prisoner, forced to recount his life story to a vampire historian. Through his narration, we follow his journey from a reckless youth to a hardened killer, battling both vampires and the corruption within his own church. As he seeks the mythical Holy Grail, rumored to be the last hope against darkness, his path is filled with tragedy, betrayal, and bloody vengeance. How good does that sound? Next up we have The Eye of the World with 782 pages. Yes, of course I had to include Wheel of Time series. It's one of my favorites. Oh, it's so good, and it's so bad in a lot of ways. It is such a flawed masterpiece, but I will say it's still a masterpiece. And if you read this whole series, almost everyone that comes to the end never says that it wasn't worth reading because there are so many incredibly highs. What I often say about Wheel of Time, it has some of the highest you can get in fantasy, but unfortunately it does also have some of the lowest. Now, if you watch BookTube, I feel like I've heard about the Wheel of Time again and again and again, so I'll just leave it there. You should check out the Wheel of Time. I love it, and a lot of other people do, especially if you're looking for a big, chunky, epic fantasy, because the first book, while it's long, almost 800 pages, is just the first book out of 14 or 15 if you count the prequel. Alright, next up we have another book that I almost never hear anyone talk about on BookTube, which will be Dreams of the Dying by Nicholas Litzau, coming in at around 826 pages. I read this book 3 years ago and I loved it, and apparently book 2 I think is going to come out finally this year, and I'm so hyped. The writing is absolutely beautiful in the story, and Nicholas Litzau really knows how to write and understand the human psychology, and dreams is such a big part of here. It's such a fascinating story, so let me tell you what it's about. The story of Dreams of the Dying follows Jasper, a former mercenary and a recovering addict, who's hired for a mysterious job on the tropical continent of Kili. A wealthy, comatose merchant named Lusquin is trapped in a nightmarish sleep, and Jasper is tasked with entering into his mind to uncover the cause of his affliction. As Jasper delves into Lusquin's dreams, he's forced to confront not only the merchant's hidden horrors, but also his own demons and traumatic past. The deeper he goes, the more the lines between reality and dream blur, pulling him into a psychological and existential struggle that could consume him. How unique and awesome does that sound? Pick it up, it's such an underrated book. Next up we have a book that I felt I needed to put on here, but yes, I have technically read it, but I don't feel like I read it, let me explain. But with 835 pages, I have put a Game of Thrones on here. Yes, technically around 5 years ago I read it, but I don't remember anything almost at all, and I never watched the series. I read this book before I started getting into fantasy. I thought it was okay, but I never really got into it. So actually a plan or a hope for me this year is to pick up a Game of Thrones again, and that will actually feel, for me at least, like the first time I've ever picked up the series. But I just felt like I had to put a Game of Thrones on here, so I don't know, maybe a bit stupid, but most people would agree with me. You probably should read it. Alright, next up with 880 pages we have Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. Yes, I had to include a Robin Hobb book, and I think Ship of Magic and the whole Light Ship Trader trilogy is one of the greatest fantasy trilogies of all time. Yes, the first book is 880 pages, but I think all three books are around that page length. The good news is that, in my opinion, all three books are so worth it. I loved the Farsi trilogy, but man, Life Ship Traders trilogy takes this series to a whole new level. It's just so crazy to me. In the Farsi trilogy, it's a single point of view first person story that is very focused on like a couple of events in a quite a small region, and then you get to the Life Ship Traders trilogy, which is third person, multiple POV, and the scale is huge and the character work is still incredible and it's so engaging and the world building is phenomenal. Good animal companions, some absolutely horrible characters or character. Kyle, I'm looking at you, hate you so much, but it also has some of the most beautiful moments I've come across in fantasy. And I know I kind of sound like a broken record, but I think that Robin Hobb just understands humans in a very unique way. I haven't really come across many authors that understand trauma the way that she does. She is the queen of fantasy for a reason, and I will argue to this day that you can start with the Life Ship Traders trilogy. Don't listen to people that say that you have to read Farsi first. I don't think you have to. You can definitely start with this one if you're worried about the Farsi trilogy. But just to hammer this point home, just listen what this series is about. The story follows the Vested family, traders from the port city of Bingtown, who own a rare and powerful life ship. Life ships are magical vessels made from wizard woods that awaken them into sentient beings after 3 generations of families' bloodlines died aboard of them. When the Westian patriarch dies, the ship Vivacia quickens, but instead of passing to his daughter Althea, who loves the ship, ownership is given to her cruel brother-in-law, Kyle Haven. Althea, determined to reclaim her birthright, embarks on a journey to prove herself as a sailor. Meanwhile, her nephew, Withrow, a boy meant for priesthood, is forced onto Vivacia and struggles against the harsh life of sea. Elsewhere, the cunning pirate Captain Kenneth seeks to capture a life ship of his own, believing it will help him achieve his dreams of ruling the private isles. Oh, just reading this just brings me back. Love the series so much, you should definitely read it. Alright, 3 more recommendations, and I had to give you 2 from one of the best and greatest horror authors of all time. Firstly, we have The Stand with 1152 pages. That is just crazy. In my opinion, it might be the best and most complete post-apocalyptic story I have ever read. I found it utterly engaging, and if other authors like Robert Jordan would have written this story, they probably would have written this story in 5 books, but you get one complete story in 1 book. Yes, it's a commitment, almost 1200 pages, but it will take you on a wild and long journey. And in my opinion, it was so rewarding. It's just a shame that we've never had a really good adaptation of this book, because the book is an absolute masterpiece. The Stand is about a deadly weaponized flu strain known as Captain Trips that wipes out 99% of the world's population, leaving behind scattered survivors struggling to rebuild society. As they navigate the ruins of civilization, 2 opposing forces emerge. Mother Abigail, an 180-year-old woman who receives prophetic visions, gathers the forces of good in Boulder, Colorado. And then we have Randall Flagg, a demonic figure with supernatural abilities, establishes a brutal dictatorship in Las Vegas, drawing those tempted by power, chaos, and violence. The survivors are pulled toward one of these leaders, leading to a confrontation between their communities. And then I had to include It by Stephen King. Some people say, oh, it's horror, it's not fantasy, but there's a lot of fantastical elements in here, so I will leave it on here. I feel like most of you know a lot about it, right? So I don't need to give you a proper overview, but if you are looking for some proper, amazing horror, that is so good, because at the heart of it, it's not a horror book, it's actually an incredible coming-of-age story, then you need to pick up this book. I picked up It for the horror, but I actually stayed for the characters. And Stephen King has written this in such a brilliant way. We have these, this iconic cast of characters, and we jump between when they're really young and now that they're adults. And that jumping back and forth between these 2 timelines is just so good. I love these characters, and I must say, I haven't come across many authors that are able to write children like Stephen King is. He's just a genius when it comes to writing children. And I also just think that Pennywise is one of the most iconic characters in the horror sphere. So yeah, it's not a book for the faint-hearted, but definitely a book that I think is so worth your time. And lastly, we have a book on 1280 pages, had to include The Way of Kings by Brando Sando. I know a lot of people are talking about Wind of Truth. I even made a video recently, and whether you watched a lot of negative or positive reviews of the last book, I will still say Way of Kings and Words of Radiance are some of the finest fantasy books I have ever read. I think Way of Kings, which is the book I'm recommending in this video, is incredible. Words of Radiance, the second book, is even better. And the fact that this book is almost 1300 pages and I still loved it just shows you how amazing this book is. But yeah, speaking of Wind of Truth, if you want to know my thoughts on the dangers of success, check out this video.
Oh, you're still here and you want more? Well, the good news is that I have a Viking book club on my Patreon. If you join my Patreon, then you get access to an exclusive book club where every single month we read one book together and the book can be put forward by you. If you join tier 3 or 4, then you can put a book forward and then I randomly choose a book from the pot that we end up reading together, and throughout the month we discuss the book on the Patreon chats. And then we also have Zoom hangouts, which honestly are some of my favorite times of the month. This month we're reading this book and next month we're gonna be reading this book. Also, since I launched my Patreon, I basically spent my money back into the channel on video editing. I've had more than 40 videos professionally edited, so if you want to support what I do here and also help me upload more consistently, then I'll leave a link in the description down below.